That, how's
Just
the audio?
recording. Um, just-
So wait, we were okay on the two
yeah, it's
shots.
recording already.
Okay, now one thing we've got to do is we've got to get these cameras more with headshots,
Right now,
and we need more light. We need more light on the subject here.
Should I be looking
In
at
case you notice, Bob has a better suntan than I do. Okay,
I played golf this morning, so I got my
that's it.
Optical Express.
Yeah, that's from Bass. That's the optometrist inside Baskin Armor.
Who did your cataract surgery?
Someone from the Army Burn Center in Texas.
Oh.
She's terrific.
is that
We need even a close to headshot.
Closer than close.
And I've got to find my other note. Ten 987654321.
1098-765-4321.
This is good. So, and are we recording now?
should be
And all levels are good. And we'll go in 3, 2, 1. Greetings, and this is Mark Scheinbaum at LYNN University, and I'm here with Bob Arnold, our guest today. This is part of our dissertation work for the College of Professional Studies, and we're looking into the motivation for students who have graduated recently, or maybe they graduated a long time ago with a bachelor's degree, and they're thinking about perhaps applying to graduate or professional school, and particularly students from what we call now historically marginalized communities. And this could be anything from people with special physical needs to people who feel that they were bullied because of language, ethnic, racial backgrounds, or whatever. And mainstreaming them really was not enough to motivate a lot of people to make that tough decision to go ahead beyond the bachelor's program as part of their career choice. And that's why we're interviewing people who've had these experiences. And by the way, when we're done with this series, we'll try to edit them together for you because obviously people choosing the private sector or AmeriCorps or the military or Teach America or the Peace Corps, so many variables go into the decisions people make after their bachelor's degree that graduate and professional school is just one of them. And we're going to be looking at some non-traditional aspects of the decision-making process for many folks that are not usually covered in the literature. So I'm Mark Scheinbaum, and I'm happy to be your host in this series of interviews. And our guest today is attorney Bob Arnold. And Bob, I know we've had some technical difficulties in studio, but first, thank you for being with us today.
Very happy to be here, Mark. Happy to be your guest.
And let me just say that you have executed all of our forms and all of our disclaimers, and you have no problem in recording this and having other people listen to your story and sharing your views of higher education with other people.
Correct.
Okay, that's terrific. Start by giving us a brief biographical sketch of your family, your background, and of course, the ultimate strategy here is to keep moving towards the graduate degree program, the things that motivated you for college and then graduate school after that. But begin with a little self-introduction on yourself, your family, and your background.
How far back do you want to go?
Well, to the time you were born would be good.
When
But you only have about 3 minutes, but that's
I was born, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. 21 days after my mom's 16th birthday, I was her second child. I was born out of wedlock. My mother was one of 9 children, and I feel fortunate in that my mother, when I was about 3 years old, met and married a guy who had joined the U.S. military and was on his way to Korea. My mother had gotten a job in St. Louis, Missouri at a processing station because that was as far west as the United States government went at the time. And she met this guy at this processing station, and they got married. And he eventually ended up adopting us, me and my brother. And we grew up as army brats after that. So
how many different cities did you live in growing up?
probably 5 or 6. So we lived in Savannah, Georgia. We lived in Huntsville, Georgia. Obviously, I lived in St. Louis. Lived in Killeen, Texas. Lived in. We never ventured outside of Fort Knox, Kentucky. Um, we lived in Baumholder, Germany. We lived in Sagahara, Japan. So yeah, how many is that? 5 or 6,
I
7?
lost.
Yeah,
I lost
yeah,
count.
yeah.
And were there places where you stayed for 3 or 4 years, or was it always 6 months or a year? I mean, were there 1 or 2 locations where you were able to learn the local language and really adopt the culture, or was it boom, boom, boom?
You never really adopted the culture as an army brat because, especially then, I don't know if it's changed quite a bit now, but back then, in the American military, you were in a bubble. You interacted locally, but you never really interacted in a way where you adopted the culture. So, when I was a kid, the first place we lived was Japan. Once my mother married my father, and I went to kindergarten in Japan. And, I recall running outside of the fence to cross a road to get candy from, a local vendor. But that was about as much cultural interaction as we had. My brother will tell you the story of how I jumped on the back of like a Japanese rickshaw and fell off and basically got a concussion. I was in the hospital for a couple of days, and he still loves to tell that story of us as kids and us experiencing the Japanese culture. That was really it.
I think that the story of the Army brat and having had 2 of my kids involved in the military and saying the same thing, where there was not a lot of when you're garrisoned and you're in an elementary school where it's the same curriculum in Fort Gordon, Georgia, or perhaps in Germany, it's not much interaction with the local cultures. So,
But hold on. I mean, it's different overseas versus the United States. In the United States, you do interact locally with obviously the local American schools because the DoD, Department of Defense, subsidizes each military student in the local school district. So by the time we got to high school, for example, in Killeen, Texas, I graduated from Ellison High School, which was local kids went to the high school as well as military brats. Before that, there was Killeen High School, and now I understand it's grown even further.
and you don't necessarily live on base. I mean, there are housing shortages. There are a lot of reasons, cost of living. So, many dependents get allowances. Not everyone lives on base. So you're going to a local school with local students, and you may be shopping, not necessarily at clothing sales or PX, but in the same Walmart with other people.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so let us take a look at the Army brat experience. Lots of different cities, large family. Your mother, as you said, um, gave you the advantage of her relationship by really putting you in maybe a safer environment. And I guess this is the spoiler because we are talking about postgraduate and professional schools. And for those of you just joining us, we're taking a look at how the Army brat, with so many things perhaps thrown against him, ends up sitting here with us today in a studio in Florida as a Harvard Law School graduate. And the journey in between is not dissimilar from some of the other guests we've had in this series. So let me take you back a little bit to school, to sports teams, to church, to scouts. Just think about any one mentor or influence who you think of today, someone who really, really inspired you to go to college or graduate school. Is there any one person or one or two people?
Honestly, Mark, no. I think I was self-motivated, and I say that because DNA is like a very, very weird thing. My brother is nothing like me. My brother did not go to college. He had no desire to go to college. My sister did not go to college, and we're all basically from the same nuclear family. So um, I don't think there were any external motivations for us to do anything in particular, but certainly not going to college. I don't think I can point to anyone and say that's the reason I went to college, other than honestly myself. I mean, for me, it was just a path that I thought that you take if you are going to try to better yourself, if you're going to try to, quote, live the American dream.
And this is interesting because the story of Bob Arnold is contrary to supposedly the tremendous academic literature dealing with what variables influence young people, particularly people from so-called minority or marginalized communities, to go to college and then graduate school. And yet the people who I have been interviewing, it's anecdotal at some point, it's preliminary, have agreed with you that saying, you know what, when no one else in my family went to college or really talked about it, I think the motivation came from me, from things I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So you had 8 siblings?
No, it was my mother had 8 siblings.
Okay.
I had 3 siblings.
And you were the only one who went to college, or you were the
Yes.
first one to go to
I
college?
was the only one who went to college.
And did your mother ever go to college?
No, I don't. My mother never got her GED, as far as I know. I remember helping my mother like study for the GED, and I remember her just not doing it.
And it was your stepfather who was in the military.
But I don't use the word step because I mean he stepped in, and he wasn't my biological father, but
He was the only dad.
he was. Well, I knew my real dad.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. But no, for all practical intents and purposes, he's my father, and I consider him my father. Just like I don't know if you're familiar with Shaquille O'Neal,
Mhm.
but he has a similar background to mine in a way, and he has a song called "Phil Is My Father," which basically Phil is the army guy who adopted him and married his mother long after Shaq was born, and his biological father came back around once Shaquille made it big, and Shaquille's response to that was, "Phil is my father."
So we're going to say your father in the military, was he given for promotional opportunities, advanced coursework, and different certifications he took, or did he go on to graduate school or undergraduate school or an associate?
No, he never did. My father was a smart guy, but he just didn't have any real ambition. He was offered, and I remember us talking about this when we were younger. He was offered a slot in OCS, which is Officers Candidate School, because he was an NCO. He retired as an NCO, and he chose not to do it because he just didn't want the responsibility of it all. I remember, pretty clearly him saying that just wasn't him. He was just a different kind of person, but he was really a smart guy. I mean, he was a smart guy, and he was ambitious in his own way, and I think his ambition was for long-term security, which is what attracted him to the military. But he wasn't ambitious in that he wanted to be a general or anything like that. He was like a lot of people, I would say, in the United States. They have one eye on their 401k or their retirement or whatever, and they don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that.
And the things that in your K-12 experiences on military bases, perhaps, or in the community, in the local school, in the school district, uh, were you conscious of things that made you want to go to a university or a college, or you weren't concentrating on that?
No, so my own personal ambition, like, I tell people this, and this is my story. The first thing I ever actually wanted to be, I know this. This is the first like conscious thought about who I'm going to become. I wanted to be a Marine Corps fighter pilot. And in order to be a Marine Corps fighter pilot, I know that you had to go to and well, you had to go, I thought you had to go to Annapolis, and that's what I planned to do, go to Annapolis. So that meant necessarily that I was going to go to school, to college. And that's kind of how I set myself up. That's what I planned to do. And that, in terms of external motivation, that came from a television show. That came from Black Sheep Squadron, starring Robert Conrad as Pappy Boynton. And I just remember, those guys being outcasts and nonetheless being top performers, high performers, and heroes for their country, so to speak. And that was the identity. That was what I wanted to become. That's who I wanted to be.
Unbeknownst to you, you've already touched on two of the three main motivational ingredients that are pretty well accepted for having people make that leap, not only undergraduate, but into graduate and professional school. So move forward a second. You attained your undergraduate degree from where?
University of Missouri, St. Louis.
And you majored in,
Communications and economics.
and you enjoyed school?
It was the best time of my life, to be honest with you. And in this way, I had just gotten out of the military, so I had what was the GI Bill, but what was at the time was called the VEAP, Veterans Employment, Veterans Educational Assistance Program, or something like that. So I had money. I was totally motivated because I was driven. I knew what I wanted to do. And the most important thing I had, which is an important part of, the thing that drives me, is freedom. Like, I could set my own schedule. I could choose my own courses. I could show up, and I was totally motivated to do all those things, and I did them. And in some ways, college was the time of my life. I wasn't a struggling student in a way, because not only did I have the military money behind me, my grades were so good that I was, getting scholarships, and I was getting dean's lists, and it was a state school, so they'd give you a little bit extra money if your GPA was a certain level, and blah blah blah. So yeah, I loved it. I had a great time.
And you were how old when you got your bachelor's degree?
So probably 25. Let's see. I spent 4 years in the military, 18 to 22. I graduated in 3 years. So yeah, I'd say 25.
Okay. Bob Arnold, at age 25, military veteran, a good background in his bachelor degree program. Take 2 or 3 minutes to walk us through the time from that graduation day till the time that you made the decision to fill out that application, to mail it in or whatever, and to apply for graduate or professional school. How did that come about? Where did you choose to apply, and why?
Well, you do all of that long before you graduate. I mean, that process starts long before you graduate.
No, not if somebody, we know people who graduated and they don't apply to graduate school to 15 years later.
No,
20 years later.
that didn't happen. That wasn't.
So while you were a senior,
Even before I was a senior. I have a friend, Tom D'Artes. If you ever meet him, I may see him at Thanksgiving, by the way. If you ever meet him, he has a story of when we were privates, me telling him that I was going to go to Harvard Law School. I don't remember telling him that, but he tells me that story.
wow, really?
That's what he says. So the process for putting myself in position to go to graduate school or law school for me sort of began when I realized I could not be a naval aviator. I could not be a Marine Corps fighter pilot when I lost my 2020 vision. And at that point, I was sort of bummed out for a period of time. Then I was just thinking, well, what the hell am I going to do? What can I do with my life? I still want to do something that is sort of on the elite level. I still want to do something that people can be proud of, something that I've done, all of these things. So I basically, maybe 16 years old, I said, I guess I can go to law school
Well,
and figure it out.
wait a second here, because this is something